Just the past hour, the King has delivered a personal message about his experience of cancer and says that his cancer treatment can be reduced in the new year.
King Charles's health has an unexpected turn.
Britain's King Charles just gave a rare update on his cancer recovery in a televised message, saying that he is responding well to treatment.
Late at night at Balmoral, emergency medical protocols were activated, senior aides were called in, and doctors warned that the next phase would be unpredictable. What happened during those critical hours, and who truly stepped forward when the crown was at its most vulnerable? Join us as we find out what has been happening in the palace since King Charles's battle against cancer. Royal Palace confirms heartbreaking news. Shortly after midnight, a senior palace doctor made an emergency call. Earlier, the palace had issued a brief statement saying King Charles's cancer treatment had entered a new phase. Insiders knew that meant doctors had seen unexpected changes and could no longer guarantee stability. Overnight, test results confirmed the king's condition had worsened. The change was sudden enough that doctors ordered constant supervision and emergency adjustments. Balmoral transformed quickly from a private residence into a controlled medical setting. Equipment was brought in, staff schedules were cleared, and senior aides were called from home. Within minutes, the castle became a fully managed medical environment. Prince William arrived shortly after and received a direct briefing. Doctors explained the decline had been faster than projected and that the next period would be unpredictable. Key decisions could not wait, and family presence was critical for both medical consent and continuity at the top of the monarchy. Then everyone noticed something missing. The Queen consort had not traveled to Balmoral. An advisor confirmed she remained in London with no clear timeline for arrival. Several people later described the moment as uncomfortable, given the seriousness of the king's condition. No official record exists of private discussions between senior staff and the Queen consort. The palace has refused to comment. Multiple sources, however, confirmed that travel arrangements were available, and her absence immediately caused uncertainty. Medical teams required family input, and communications staff needed clear leadership. None of that could be fully coordinated without her presence. By early morning, the contrast was clear. Cameras caught Catherine traveling north, tired but composed. At the same time, photographers spotted the Queen consort leaving central London for an undisclosed location. Those images shaped the day's coverage before the palace released any additional statements. Inside Balmoral, attention remained on the king. Doctors adjusted treatment plans and prepared for multiple outcomes. Aides drafted statements to inform the public without causing alarm. During brief, lucid moments, the king asked about staff, schedules, and duties, emphasizing the need for calm leadership and stability. The palace's official position remained narrow. King Charles was under close medical supervision, treatment continued, updates would come when appropriate, and there was no comment on family movements. The silence was deliberate, but it left unanswered questions filling the gap. What is confirmed? The king's condition worsened suddenly. Emergency measures were taken, and the monarchy had to adapt in real time. Roles shifted fast, expectations were tested, and the people who stepped forward became visible to everyone watching. As Britain waits for the next update on King Charles' health, one question is already shaping how this moment will be remembered. Who truly took control behind the palace doors? Catherine steps in at Balmoral. Catherine arrived at Balmoral just after 2 a.m. Her convoy was small, with no police escort and no advance notice to the press. She wanted to avoid attention and keep the focus on King Charles, not herself. At the gates, reporters barely noticed the cars. Staff later realized how important that moment would become. She stepped out in a simple navy coat and low heels, carrying a single folder. She walked straight inside, no aides following. Several staff said her body language was calm but firm, like someone who already understood the responsibility waiting inside. In the king's private room were Charles, Princess Anne, and a night nurse. The king was awake, but clearly weak. He had been told some family members were delayed, a phrase used when plans are unclear. His mood changed when Catherine entered. Princess Anne later said the relief on his face was visible. Catherine went straight to his side, held his hand, and reassured him quietly. The nurse, who had decades of royal experience, said it was remarkable how grounded the moment felt. It helped steady everyone in the room. What followed surprised even senior aides. Catherine stayed. She did not leave or act symbolically. Over the next several hours, she worked directly with staff, asking doctors clear questions about treatment, medication timing, and rest schedules. Medical teams confirmed she already knew key details about cancer care, which sped up decisions. She also focused on structure. Catherine helped set up a rotating presence so the king would not be alone. She coordinated with Princess Anne on which family members should be updated and when. When William needed rest after long meetings, she insisted he take it. One courtier said she acted like she was protecting both the patient and the system around him. At one point, a junior aide questioned whether these decisions should come from someone more senior. Princess Anne shut that down, saying seniority comes from action in moments like this. After that, no one challenged Catherine's role. By sunrise, the atmosphere inside Balmoral had changed. Plans were clear, responsibilities defined, and communication calmer. Catherine read brief updates to the king when he was alert and enforced privacy rules. She stayed with Princess Anne during worrying test updates, offering support rather than commentary. Outside the palace, attention shifted fast. Morning news programs confirmed the king was under close medical supervision. They mentioned senior family members were present but avoided naming the queen consort. Viewers noticed. Social media quickly filled the gap, comparing who was at Balmoral and who was not. That evening, Catherine briefly stepped outside the gates. She gave no statement, only noting that the king was resting and being cared for. The moment lasted under 2 minutes but set the tone for coverage. The next day, newspapers focused on her presence. Headlines praised duty, steadiness, and quiet leadership. Analysts noted that while no formal announcement had changed the monarchy, something had clearly shifted in practice. What few realized was that this was not temporary. Catherine was not just filling a gap, she was shaping decisions, care, and stability, quietly and effectively. But while this unfolded in Scotland, another response was brewing in London. What exactly was being written behind closed doors, and how would it change everything? Private letters, public moment. While King Charles stayed under close medical care at Balmoral, attention quietly moved to London, where the Queen Consort remained out of sight at Clarence House. At first, people assumed privacy meant she was concerned. That assumption didn't last. Staff noticed she wasn't calling Balmoral for updates or coordinating with medical teams. Instead, her focus was on writing letters. These weren't short notes. They were long, handwritten letters sent to trusted courtiers, familiar journalists, and people inside the royal household. The tone was defensive and personal. One letter, later leaked to a major newspaper, framed her absence as a moral choice. She wrote that she was protecting dignity and refusing to turn grief into a public show. She believed staying away demonstrated principle, not distance. That letter raised eyebrows but didn't hurt her standing. A second letter did. Sent to a longtime confidant, it criticized Catherine directly. Camilla said Catherine was well-meaning, but didn't understand boundaries. She accused her of seeking attention and benefiting from timing instead of effort. The letter also revealed long-standing frustration, pointing to resentment that Catherine had quickly gained public approval after years of hesitation from the royal family. Once these words surfaced, the reaction was immediate. Newspapers led with the letters. TV panels replayed the lines. Commentators questioned why the king's illness had turned into a personal complaint aired in private messages. The online reaction was even sharper. Public opinion polls showed a sharp drop in support for the Queen consort, with approval ratings falling more than 20 points in a few days. At Balmoral, the mood hardened. Princess Anne reportedly called the situation unacceptable, saying that when a nation worries about its monarch, the focus must be on care, not commentary. William was said to be furious about the timing. Doctors had just reported a small improvement in the king's condition. Catherine pushed for silence from the palace. Her reasoning was practical. Responding would only feed the story. Quiet action would speak louder. A moment meant to restore calm backfired. After days out of view, Camilla agreed to attend a small church service near London. It was planned carefully: modest clothing, a private setting, limited media access. The goal was to project calm and duty. What happened instead erased progress. As she left, a young girl holding flowers stood nearby. Cameras caught Camilla walking past without stopping, focused only on her car. The child froze, flowers outstretched. The clip spread quickly. By nightfall, it was everywhere. The image became symbolic in a way no statement could undo. Commentators who had defended Camilla began stepping back. Even cautious political voices questioned whether she still held public trust. Inside the palace, consequences followed quietly. 3 major donors to her charitable foundation withdrew support, citing public perception. 2 of her long-term patronages began working with other royal offices. Clarence Howe's staff submitted 9 transfer requests in 1 week, signaling collapsing confidence in her office. The royal household began to split. One group worked under William and Catherine, handling care, communications, and stability. Another remained tied to Camilla's silent office. The divide was now visible. King Charles was shielded from much of the coverage, but not all. In one moment, he asked Princess Anne if his wife had come to Balmoral. She answered honestly. He said nothing at first, then made a quiet remark that would ripple through the monarchy, even if it was never recorded. The problem wasn't just knowing what he wanted. It was how to act on it while he was sick and bound by protocol. At the same time, a more complicated question was unfolding. What happens when authority quietly shifts without following the legal rules designed for it? Constitutional gamble nobody mentions. While everyone focused on headlines and personalities, constitutional experts were quietly watching the palace. Britain has clear laws for when a monarch can't perform duties. The Regency Act of 1937 exists for this exact reason. It lays out formal procedures, protections, and rules to avoid confusion if a king or queen becomes incapacitated. This time, the palace didn't use it. That choice was deliberate but risky. By letting William and Catherine run day-to-day operations without a formal title, the palace chose speed and optics over clear legal authority. On the surface, it looked decisive. In constitutional terms, it created a gray zone that the monarchy usually avoids. The gamble works only if the public accepts it and King Charles stays stable. If his condition worsens suddenly, serious questions could emerge. Who can make medical decisions? Who can approve government actions that need royal assent? Who speaks for the crown internationally? These are not abstract problems. In 1788, King George III's mental illness caused a real constitutional crisis because there was no clear plan for temporary leadership. Parliament debated for months, while the government struggled to function. Regency laws were written to prevent that chaos from repeating. By sidestepping those laws now, the palace is betting that informal authority will hold. Informal power depends entirely on perception, not legal process. Once the public sees William and Catherine as the functional leaders, it's almost impossible to reverse, even if Charles recovers. History shows this rarely goes back. When George VI became seriously ill in 1951, Princess Elizabeth took on more duties. Even after he briefly recovered, she never fully stepped back. By the time he died in 1952, the handover felt inevitable. The palace may be repeating that pattern on purpose. By letting William and Catherine lead now, they're preparing the country for a future transition without formally announcing it. It's a quiet rehearsal, with real consequences. Even foreign governments have noticed. Diplomatic cables now route through Kensington Palace before Buckingham Palace. Commonwealth representatives are briefed to go to William's office for certain matters. The shift became a functional reality without public notice. This approach protects the king's dignity while showing continuity. It also protects the monarchy by avoiding disruption. But it bends constitutional rules in ways that could set a precedent. In the age of instant media, informal authority can solidify faster than formal legal processes. The risk is real. Legal experts warn that if Charles's health declines, urgent decisions could face legal challenges. Bills needing royal assent, military actions requiring approval, or international treaties could all become complicated if power remains informal. The palace is asking the nation to accept a kind of constitutional fiction. The king is still in charge, but his son acts with authority and practice. Professor Helena Thornton from Oxford's Constitutional Law Institute notes this works only in calm times. Any sudden crisis, medical or political, could reveal the fragility of this setup. She warns that the monarchy is trading short-term appearances for long-term constitutional risk. For now, the palace seems confident. Public acceptance is giving informal authority legitimacy. But questions, is this stability real, or is it just a temporary illusion that could collapse at the worst possible moment? And just as this uncertainty loomed, King Charles was preparing to address the nation. What he said next wouldn't just shape public perception. It could define how this entire crisis would be remembered. The king speaks for himself. King Charles deciding to speak directly to the country was far from routine. Normally, when a monarch is seriously ill, the palace issues brief written statements that keep distance and emotion from the public. This time that approach was failing. Rumors were spreading, trust was slipping, and people weren't thinking about tradition. They were worried about the man himself. Prince William raised the issue during a rare afternoon when Charles felt strong enough to have a long conversation. He said silence was causing harm and that a written statement would not calm the country. People needed to see the king, hear his voice, and understand how he wanted this moment handled. Catherine agreed. She pointed out that the public already knew he was ill, and honesty would not weaken the crown. It would protect it. Charles hesitated. He worried that people would remember only how frail he looked. Catherine spoke clearly, but gently, telling him that leadership included controlling how history would see him, even when strength was limited. Her words convinced him. The broadcast aired at 7 p.m., timed for families across the country. The setup was simple. Charles sat in a chair near a window at Balmoral. No crown, no flags, just natural light and a plain suit that showed how much weight he had lost. The palace announced it only 2 hours before to prevent speculation and keep the focus on his message. When the screen came on, Charles looked visibly ill and thinner, but his voice was steady. He spoke openly about his health, calling it a test and admitting his limits. He emphasized service and duty, explaining that leadership depended on trust more than appearances. His words felt personal, not rehearsed. Then he praised Catherine by name, highlighting her strength, kindness, and sense of responsibility. He referenced qualities once embodied by Diana and connected them directly to Catherine. For royal watchers, this was striking. Charles rarely spoke so openly about Diana in official settings, and doing it now carried meaning. Next, he addressed the future. He said William would take on more responsibility in the coming months, much like Charles had done for his own mother. He expressed full confidence in both William and Catherine. His words were careful, but the meaning was clear. Authority was shifting in practice, even if titles hadn't changed. The broadcast ended quietly. Across the country, people reacted emotionally. Crowds gathered outside palace gates and candles appeared in windows. Many felt reassured rather than lost. The king hadn't stepped back, he had pointed forward. At Clarence House, the reaction was different. Camilla watched with a small group of aides. When it ended, she reportedly said only 3 words in acknowledgement of the broadcast. There was no official statement from her office that night or the next day. 2 days later, the palace released a photograph. Charles sat at the center. William stood behind him with a hand on his shoulder. Catherine sat close to the king. The image followed the visual rules of succession used for generations. Camilla was omitted. The caption was simple: continuity and care. Palace officials explained the photo reflected who was handling daily responsibilities while Charles was receiving treatment. It was not sentimental, it was functional. The monarchy had not officially announced a change, but the image made the balance undeniable. For Camilla, who still held the title of Queen Consort but had been sidelined, the question was no longer whether she mattered. The real question became whether she ever would again. And history, as it always does, seemed ready to answer. What happens to consorts who lose influence? They remain queen in name, but their influence fades. The palace doesn't need to remove them formally. It quietly stops asking for their advice, cuts resources, and redirects attention. The consort becomes a figurehead, respected outwardly, but excluded from real decisions. Queen Alexandra, wife of Edward VII, is a classic example. In his final years, he turned more often to his mistress and trusted advisors. Alexandra stayed queen, attended state functions, and kept her household. But decisions moved forward without her input. When Edward died in 1910, she lived 15 more years, largely forgotten by the institution she had once helped lead. Her apartments were reduced, her staff shrank, and her relevance ended. Catherine of Braganza, married to Charles II, faced a similar fate. After the king died in 1685, she stayed in England for a few years, but her role became empty. The court's attention moved on. New alliances formed. Resources that had supported her household were redirected. She eventually returned to Portugal, disconnected from the British crown, not by law, but by neglect. More recently, Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent, shows how this works in modern times. After her husband died in 1942, she retained her title and continued to perform her duties, but her influence declined steadily. By the 1960s, younger royals were in the spotlight. Her opinions on family matters were ignored. Her patronages received less funding and attention. She remained a duchess in name, but her voice carried no weight in palace decisions. When she died in 1968, the monarchy barely paused to acknowledge her. Camilla's situation echoes these examples, but with a new twist. Her decline is happening in public view. Everyone can see it unfold in real time. The palace isn't waiting for Charles to die to reduce her role. It's happening now while he is alive. The practical impact is clear. Money reflects influence. The sovereign grant, which funds royal activities, is allocated based on workload and visibility. Camilla's office budget for the next year has been quietly cut by 18%. 2 senior communications staff positions were not renewed. The Royal Collection Trust removed her name from several exhibition projects she had helped create. These moves are subtle but meaningful. When Charles dies, her position will have to be clarified. Traditionally, queen consorts become queen dowagers, keeping respect and some privileges but stepping back from active roles. Camilla may follow that path, but the current trend suggests it could go further. If public sentiment stays negative and the institution continues to distance itself, she may face the most complete sidelining of any modern consort. The question is no longer whether Camilla can reclaim influence. It's whether she will be allowed any real role after Charles is gone. Based on history and current trends, the answer looks increasingly clear. She will likely keep the courtesy title of Queen Dowager, but the substance of royal life will move on without her. Meanwhile, someone else's influence is growing, and it is changing the monarchy in ways that will be felt long after this crisis ends. Who now carries real authority? One ordinary morning at Windsor quietly changed how people saw the monarchy. There was no press notice, no staged photo. William and Catherine walked out with their children just like any family going to work and school. Catherine had a meeting scheduled with Commonwealth youth ambassadors, and the staff who usually handled it were busy managing the king's health crisis. Someone still had to show up, so she did. A few reporters were already outside hoping for news on King Charles. The family moved calmly toward their car. One reporter asked how the king was doing. Catherine stopped. She didn't have to. Protocol would have let her walk on. But she turned, answered clearly that he was resting and that they were moving forward together, then waved, helped the children into the car, and left. That short exchange spread quickly. Later that morning, Catherine chaired the youth meeting. She arrived prepared, knowing the projects each ambassador worked on, asking detailed questions about education, climate, and local leadership. Attendees expected a quick greeting and photos, but instead, they got real conversations. Palace staff were surprised by how she handled decisions. During the meeting, she approved support for several youth programs and asked staff to begin coordination immediately. Normally, these steps would go through multiple layers of review. When an aide raised this, she calmly said that promises only matter if they lead to action. Work moved forward. Within days, the operational shift became clear across the royal institution. Requests that used to go first to Buckingham Palace now went to William's office. Foreign dignitaries confirmed they had been quietly briefed to send certain matters to the future king. Commonwealth representatives acknowledged adjusting their contact protocols. The system was now following competence rather than hierarchy. The Privy Council held an emergency remote session to discuss the king's health and planning. William led the call. Catherine sat beside him as an active participant, asking about coordination with Commonwealth governments and public messaging. Camilla joined only as an observer. Decisions moved forward without her input. The shift extended beyond protocol. Financial decisions about royal properties, staffing, and security began to be routed through William's office. One senior aide noted it happened so smoothly that many staff didn't even realize they were following a new authority structure until weeks later. Government ministers also reflected the change. The Home Secretary confirmed security briefings, usually sent to the monarch's private secretary, now went through Kensington Palace first. The Foreign Office said diplomatic cables about Commonwealth matters were copied to William's team before Buckingham Palace. Treasury officials said discussions about the sovereign grant now included William's advisors as primary stakeholders. All of this happened without formal announcement or legal authorization. It became reality because William and Catherine were present, engaged, and effective while others were not. A few days later, Kensington Palace released a new portrait of Catherine. She wore pale blue, minimal jewelry, and looked directly at the camera. The caption emphasized service and responsibility, not rank. The public reacted immediately. Letters and flowers arrived daily. Privately, King Charles addressed the situation in a meeting with William and Princess Anne. He asked that Camilla's dignity be respected but made clear that authority should remain with those doing the work. He praised Catherine's steadiness and stressed that the institution must never strip her of her humanity. Palace observers compared it to the final years of Queen Elizabeth II, when Charles gradually took on more duties without formal announcement. The lesson was clear: transitions work best when shown, not declared. Power has shifted. The future has already begun. And the people carrying it forward did so not by claiming authority, but by earning it one decision, one moment, one day at a time. Will Charles recover enough to take back full control, or will power stay quietly in William's hands? And when the king is gone, where does that leave Camilla, honored as a widow or quietly written out of the future? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.